right. Welcome to What Could Go Wrong Live. I think we're at episode 4. We've made it this far. And I am joined today by the host of Overthrowing Education, which is like my favorite podcast ever. So please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Batsheva Frankel. I have to say that the music coming in was so like meditative, and I was like off in a quiet place, just having like a moment, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, here we are.
I was like, so, yeah, here we are.
So I'm Batsheva Frankel, and I am a longtime veteran educator and author and educational consultant. I have New Lens Education. I love life.
I got it.
New Lens Ed is my educational consulting. It's also morning here. I'm in Los Angeles. We're still in morning. So, give me some slack. Okay.
It's fine.
But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, I give courses and workshops online to teachers all over the world. And I do it in person when you're allowed to. And that's kind of what I do. And so, so I have the podcast Overthrowing Education, which I really love. And that's me. Yeah.
Well, I think that's how I found you, was your podcast. And then I stalked you on LinkedIn and it was like, I'm going to talk to this, celebrity of education. I'm going to find her on LinkedIn. Okay. And we're going to be best friends. I'm going to make her talk to me. And then when we finally had a conversation, I told my husband, I was like, guess what? The host of Overthrowing Education is going to talk with me. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting.
It's so funny because you're such a superstar of education. You're such a forward thinker. You are absolutely, I 100%. It's so funny that I love that.
I know.
But yeah, I love talking to you. We had such a fun conversation. And and you're going to be on my podcast at some point, right?
I told my husband that too, and he was like, oh my gosh, are you okay?
I love what you post. You post really amazing things, and I'm always interested in it. And it's and funny and charming. And I mean, I try to do that on my podcast. I try to make it entertaining as well as informative, and I try to make it fun. And wait till you play the 5-minute game show. I'm going to.
Oh dear. I'm a little nervous about the game show.
Everybody is.
But I'm excited about your parody commercials. Those are my favorite.
Yeah.
Yes. And I have to tell everyone, I think I told you this, when I was first listening to it, I thought that I was like, is this a real commercial? I mean, I really had to listen to it and then start it over and then go,
not be real. No. So, the fomercials, I call them, right? Fake educational products that we wish were real. Those are so much fun to put together. Oh my God.
They crack me up. So if for no other reason, you go hang out at Overthrowing Education podcast just for the infomercials, do it for that and know that they're not real and don't get confused because
some of them are really more not real than others. Some of them are really totally crazy. And I've had a couple of episodes. We'll have to see if you do this. I've had a couple episodes where my guest for that episode actually either helps me write it, or in one case, we came up with an idea and he's like, let me just see what I can put together. Joshua Silverstein, and he's hilarious. He's a comedian and a rapper and an educator.
Wow.
And I mean, it was so funny. So a beatboxer. So he just did the whole thing himself. He produced the whole thing. His kids are on it. It's so funny.
My gosh. So, I have not heard that one. Which episode is that on? Oh. Do you know off the top of your head? I guess I could just look up the name.
Yeah, it's with Joshua Silverstein. It is, I can look it up.
It's morning. It's fine.
It's morning. I mean, I can look it up. It was something good. It was pretty recent. I think it came out sometime in the fall. And, just check the show notes. But anyway, he's really funny. You'll like it. He's great. So it's really fun. But I also really love the opportunity to get to talk with other passionate educators who are doing amazing and interesting and innovative things. And it really, we were going to talk about today going gradeless. And I really got to, I know my personal experience with it which was great. But then I got to connect with other amazing educators who are doing it. And my very first episode, I was like, this is so important. My very first episode is about ungrading, and I called it Why Grades Fail Us. And it's with Jesse Stomel. And he wrote this essay, and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy, this is it. I got to get this guy on my show. And so he was my first guest. And then later I have an episode called Going Gradeless with teachers from a school. They started a whole school based on this idea. Shannon Green and Vikita Shannon Green.
That was recent, relatively recent.
Yeah,
right?
that was relatively recent. I mean, it was like, I don't know, spring, I think. I don't know.
Yeah,
you know, time is so weird these days. And one day,
in a vacuum of confusion. I don't
even know what day it is today. But that was really amazing. And people are still so listening to those episodes because they have so much good information. And I think this is a really hot topic right now, especially with everything going on in what we've been finding with the pandemic. And it's really put a spotlight on this issue of like, oh yeah, grades are really like not the best way to educate our students. Like it's really detrimental. It's not helping. What can we do to change those things? So my experience, and then I want to hear about your kids' school, because your kids go to a gradeless school too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm going to hear about that. But I first discovered it when I always hated grades anyway, but I didn't even realize there could be another way. Like, is there another way you can do that? So
no, there isn't.
Yeah. So there is. Who knew? I started teaching at a school called Arete Prep. And in my second year, the head of the school, Jim Hahn, who we really connected on educational philosophy, and he was saying, like, we need to start doing mastery. I want to stop. Students aren't just numbers, on a graph. Like, they're actually human beings.
They're human beings?
I know, weird, right? Like, who thought of that? Who would have known? Right. So yeah,
blowing everything up right now.
We have to look for mastery. Stick a grade on something, and then also like we notice that I don't know if you've ever like graded in the past where, and I, among other things, I teach English. So, you'd have an essay or whatever. If you put a ton of comments on a piece of paper and then you put a grade on it, or a number on it, I promise you, the students will not look at the comments. They don't care. They got their grade, right? And I love what Elaine says, Elaine Harper, right? Who are the grades for anyway? Mm-hmm. The students, the teachers, did report cards. I mean, really, it doesn't help. It doesn't tell me as a teacher, honestly, what that student knows or what they're capable of. Right. It just labels them. It makes them, it either gives them a false sense of dopamine, right? Get that A.
We can all use some false dopamine sometimes.
Right. I know. Give me an A. But it can also really be detrimental to a person.
Yeah.
And it can really be degrading. And I've had students, I remember, this is like my first year of teaching. I remember this student who had done this phenomenal piece of work. We were doing, I was doing something, I don't know, my first year teaching, I did all these great things that I didn't know were
kind of a blur, right?
Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I had my students, I was teaching history, and I had my students each I had to get through a huge amount of curriculum really quickly. And I was like, I'm never going to get through this. And so I just gave each of my students in pairs a chunk of something. And I was like, you're going to teach this, you're going to learn it, and you're going to teach it. And that's what's going to happen. So they did this simulation game that they made, that they created. It was based on, I had done this semester before, a different simulation game.
The students made it?
The students created it for the other students. It was amazing. I actually stole the idea and used it with a later class. It was so brilliant. The girls who did it, they were 8th graders. And one of them I was like, I just was going on and on. She's like, but I'm a C student. I don't get it. And I'm like, because you're not a C student. You're a student and you just did something brilliant. So stop labeling yourself. So that's like the first time. That was like, I don't know, 25 years ago or whatever. That was the first time I was like, grades, huh? That doesn't It's not good. So, but then it took me so long to figure out that there was another way. And it was really because when I worked at Arte and we started doing feedback. And once we started doing feedback, instead of putting grades on stuff, we put feedback on stuff. Then we were working with the students, and then they would take the feedback and they would do it again and work on it till they mastered it or came darn close, just so that, and there was a sense of accomplishment. And the interesting thing was, because now there's a middle school at Arte, but at the time it was just the high school. And, high school, at the end of the day, we still had to give a grade at the end of the semester or the end of the year, unfortunately. But we were able to give those grades without, it was the first time ever students didn't complain about their grade, because they knew exactly why they got their grade, because they'd seen everything go on. And by the way, if you're, sort of grading for mastery, if you're looking for mastery and you expect mastery, then guess what? That final grade is going to be a lot higher, because you're not going to let them fail or do C work, whatever the heck.
Right. Whatever that really means.
And C was supposed to mean average, which meant I never got that, but C is not a grade. I don't know. It's just crazy. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is that when I did that episode with Jesse, the Why Grades Fail Us, he was talking about how you work with your students. If you have to come up with that grade, you work with your students and you ask them, what's the grade that you think that you deserve? And to me, that was like light bulb moment. I was like, what an amazing idea.
You're including the student in the conversation?
Yeah.
I just can't with you.
What? That's crazy talk.
Crazy.
That's just, you might as well just overthrow education at that point.
With your mug.
Right? You see the back, join the revolution. So I did that. I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this a go. So I talked to the students, because we had before, in any case, for the narratives, we would have, the narratives were more of a conversation anyway. Like we would write our thing and then the students would write their kind of response to it. And then we tried it the reverse way, where the students did theirs, and then so it was kind of like this interesting conversation. So we try so many different things and see what everybody thinks is the best idea. But at the end of the day, I was like, I'm gonna a mug party.
I'm
gonna have a mug party. So having the students figure out what they, to reflect on their learning. Can you imagine reflecting on your learning?
It's like you're going to learn from it and then change something in the future.
What?
This is insane. Elaine, student-led assessment is great.
Oh my gosh, I'm loving this comment. I wanted to finish my thought, and that's the comment. I love it.
Finish your thought, then we have to read that.
No, that's so funny. So I would work with the students, and I would say, just as Jesse suggested, what do you think? Let's look over this work and your work for the semester, whatever. What do you think? Let's think about what are some things that we would use as criteria, first of all, and then using that criteria, what do you think? So you're also involving them in using the criteria. And here is another thing I did the following year. I had my students help me write the curriculum for the year.
Oh my gosh. You're losing your mind. You are ruining everything that education stands for.
I know.
You pretty much destroyed the ego of the educator. So,
and you know what else we didn't do? We didn't sit in rows either. I know. Isn't it awful?
I can't take you anywhere. Carl says, a teacher I know correlates grades with A for aha, B for booyah, just to switch mindsets for kids, but also many times grades are for parents, which are true. But I do like A for aha and B for booyah.
I do too. That's so great.
If you have to throw it out there, then, you might as well change it up a bit. But I think a lot of what you said about kind of dropping the education piece. No, we need that piece. Dropping the grades piece is you're replacing it with relationship.
Yes.
So you're dropping grades, but you're adding in relationships. So, the value of what you're exchanging.
Which is everything.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
The relationship is, students might not remember everything and I'm not the first person to say this, obviously, they might not remember everything you taught. They might not, but they will remember the relationship. I'm friends, like good friends, with a student of mine from my first year of teaching. So like now she's in her mid 30s or whatever. And she became a teacher too. And she said to me like years ago, I asked her a long time, she's like, you were my favorite teacher. And I was like, that's so nice. Why? And I was like, did I teach you something? She's like, yeah, I'm sure you did. But what I really
there was something in there
was how you taught and what you taught and the way you did it and the relationships. And she said, that was everything to me as an 8th grade girl. I needed that. I needed role model. I needed whatever it was. I was like, great. And so now I love that she is an educator too. And she said that, and when she was going through getting her master's, she would call me and ask me to help her with her homework. It was awesome.
Well, I think that's perfect.
Do her homework for her.
Don't do her homework for her. That's frowned upon. Right. Grades are not. That's never
right.
a practice to pick up. But I do think, a lot of times when they talk about habits, they talk about you have to replace a habit, right? Not just drop a habit. So I was reading a book, Atomic Habits, and he's talking about replacing habits. So if you're going to quit smoking, you're going to replace it with what? And so I like to think, when I was thinking of grades and relationship, I think you're not just dropping this habit of grades, you're replacing it with the habit of relationship. So every time you want to throw a grade at someone, you think of, okay, we're not doing grades, so how can I build a relationship in this setting instead of throwing a grade at them? So I like to think how often do you use grades in traditional education setting? And if you were to replace every time a grade happens with a relationship building activity, think of the change in the classroom, in the culture.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And also, I think even just the process of giving feedback is about building relationship, because it's saying to the student, I know you and your work and I care and I want you to improve and this is for, let's work on this together. Right. So I think that's really, really great. Yeah. Is that so? Ever use this Socratic method, or is that too revolutionary? Actually, the school Arete uses a seminar, what they call seminars. So we actually sit at a table with the students, and like around with the students, and it's all inquiry based. And even I think it goes beyond Socratic method, because Socratic method to me is sort of one way. There's the teacher asking the question, the students are answering the question, which is already a great level if you do it correctly and you really do Socratic, not just like asking, I don't know, content questions or closed questions, but really open questions. But I love helping students develop the questions and learning how to ask really great questions. So
yes, asking great questions is so important.
Yeah, and to ask each other questions and really develop the whole discussion approach it's great.
Yeah, I mean, you're creating a collaborative environment, which means you're going back to creating opportunity for relationship. And Erica said, replacing instead of dropping, that's an interesting approach. I find that often what the biggest thing that you come up against when doing these big shifts in education, because you go to someone, you say, hey, let's drop grades. That's a big change that you're asking of them. And the first thing you have to touch on is mindset. And so often what comes with, if you're looking for a shift in mindset, you got to think about how you're messaging it, how you're kind of branding, what you're saying. And so in a previous conversation I'd had with someone who had made the shift in their school, they were a kind of like a pod. So it was a homeschool type situation, but there were several families worth of students there, and they were doing grades and traditional learning. And then they kind of switched over to this gradeless approach. But the conversation, we had to kind of revolve it around the mindset shift. So when the conversation would lead itself to, hey, just forget grades, they're like, oh no, that's too valuable. We need that. That's important. Right. Like, okay, well then what if I shift the way that we're presenting that? What if we replace grades with relationship building? And then you're using this positive framing. We're not dropping anything. We're not getting rid of anything. We're replacing it with something valuable. And suddenly it was shifting their mindset and going, oh, okay, well, that makes more sense. We're not just trashing something, we're replacing it with something even more valuable, which leads to an interesting conversation. So
yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that
with high schoolers.
It's interesting because when I spoke to Shannon and Vakita about their school, and I said, what were some of the challenges? Was the biggest challenge of presenting this for the parents, the students, the other teachers, and and a lot of it is the parents. Like, we grew up on that system, right? And
it worked for me, it'll work for you.
Right. I always say, when people say that about education, well, we've been doing education like that, and it's always worked, and it worked for us. And I always say, like,
we turned out fine.
Yeah, we turned out fine. But do you remember, well, you might even be too young to remember this, but do you remember rotary phones? Were you around?
I mean, I understand the concept.
Oh,
I know that
you're so cute and young. So we had this thing, it was called a rotary phone, where you had to dial, right? And then it was really exciting because then it went to push button phones, but it was still like you were still tethered to the wall, right? It wasn't so that worked. I mean, I grew up as a teenager. I lived, I thrived. I turned out to be a great adult, no problem. But guess what? I have a smartphone, and I wouldn't trade that smartphone for 2 seconds for that rotary phone. So it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, that was fine if you want a rotary phone education, but I want my kids to have the smartphone education. Why would we want to go backwards? So, this is a time to think about, like, why do we need to do grades, right? Like you said, can we replace them with something more meaningful, something that adds to education and doesn't detract from it, something that, and I would like to also throw in that this means that we have to change the way we do assessments. Because I was talking to somebody, and they're like, well, what do you put on the test? And I'm like, well, but if you don't, why don't you replace the test with a way more authentic and creative form of assessment?
I like your use of the replacement there.
Well, I'm going to steal that from you. It was amazing. That's such a great, I've never used that before, but it's like, that's a great approach, and I'm going to borrow it. Yeah. So I love that, because I would say to somebody, it was so funny. I was giving this workshop on creative and authentic assessments to a very traditional school. It was online, and they brought me in for the faculty, and the head of the school was there, a very traditional school. And I was telling them about, authentic and creative assessments, and they were really, really into it. And finally, one of the teachers says, that is amazing, but like, how do you grade something like that? And I said, well, because I wasn't going to bring it up, but I said, well, actually, I don't give grades. I give feedback. And all of a sudden you could like see the heads blowing up. And they said, can you do that? yeah, I can. And I explained it, and they were like, you're
going to end up in like education jail. They're going to find you and throw you in there.
They are. I'm terribly radical. As are you. So tell me, I want to hear about your, because your kids go to a gradeless school. So how is that experience as a parent? How is their experience as students? And did they ever know anything different? That's actually what I want to know too. Like, did they go from having grades to not having grades?
Yeah. So, I mean, their whole early education through first grade was at my school when I was running the school that I was at. So through first grade at the least, especially my youngest, they had no idea what grades were. We were all experiential. We were Reggio inspired. We were hands-on, play-based, relationship-based, right? All those things. No concept of any of that. Okay.
Boy, are they in for a rude awakening a few seconds.
I mean, but my oldest she's made the whole round, because, first children, you got to try everything with them, right? They're kind of the experiment. So she's done private, charter, homeschool, I think she's done all of them. She's in fifth grade now. But we found, so she understands grades and all of that. But what we found was she is, if you were to label her like they tried to do, she is a GT learner. So they wanted to put her in this GT program. Well, then she liked it on Mondays when she got to go to GT, but then she didn't want to do the rest of the days where she wasn't, and all of that.
My son had the same experience.
Yeah,
he hated it was school except for that one.
Except for the one day
you could do that.
And the one day where she could do interest-led experiential learning was the day that she really liked. I know it's shocking. Yep. It's shocking, but
right.
So this year we've switched to homeschool because I'm now working from home. So I never had the opportunity to homeschool before. And now that I'm working from home, I was like, oh, well, this is perfect. Let's try this out. And I pretty much put her in charge of it. I said, here you go, ready, set, run with it. Here's your expectations. She is a very independent child and is doing really well. And recently we started with a program, which if I were to build a program as close as I could get to a student-led learning program that was interest-led and all those things, we have found it in an online platform school called Galileo.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So it is, she goes in, she builds her schedule. There's facilitator-led clubs, student-led clubs, there's boot camps, nano degrees, and all of that. And it's all interest-led, and she builds out her own stuff. She drops a club, doesn't like it, she can create a club if she wants to create a new one, and there's no teachers, they're facilitators. So it's kind of the epitome of co-constructivism and all that type of thing. And so she loves it. She is thriving. I mean, I think right now she's taking her animation course, which is student-led. So she's learning from other students about 3D animation. One of her classes she takes in VR. So she throws on her goggles, they meet inside of VR, and it's an international platform. Yeah. So she came out the other day and she's like, hey, Mom, I had someone in my class from Wales and Spain and this and that. Wow. And so she's getting to experience this. It's bigger than, where we are. And so it kind of has all of those concepts in it. So we no longer do grades or any of that. But my youngest has dyslexia and ADHD. So she has a different learning experience than my oldest. And she never understood grades. And so the most recent school that she was at, they tried to give her a grade. It was the first time. And she came home going, Mom, what's a grade? What I got a 87? Like, what is this? What does this mean? I don't understand what you're saying to me. And I was like, I wouldn't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And we kind of moved on. Well, then there were a couple situations where the teachers, who are beautiful, lovely humans, but they were trying to use grades as a motivator for Alea. And she's like, I don't know what you're saying. And they're like, well, if you don't focus on this, if you don't blah, 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 then you're going to get a bad grade. And Alea's like, I don't understand what you're saying.
No, don't care.
And she's like, my mom says that doesn't matter. So, and I was like, oh, you got me called into a parent meeting. Like, now I'm having to sit in a meeting. But I pretty much said, look, you can use that if you want, but I'm telling you, we are not reinforcing that at home. Right. Because we don't care about grades, and I understand what that means to you as an educator, and I understand how I'm hurting your soul right now. I really do. And we are not trying to be disrespectful, and I'm not encouraging her to be disrespectful. However, we are not driven by the grade you may get at the end. It's process over product, all those types of things.
Yeah.
And so, but the teacher sitting across from me was just like, what are you saying to me right now? And so right now she's in kind of a hybrid situation with some different classes. We're still trying to figure out what works best for her. But long story short, she still doesn't really understand grades. She knows there's a bad grade and a good grade, but she still doesn't quite compute what those are.
That's even a thing, that there's a bad grade and a good grade. I mean, instead of saying like, hey, let's help you learn this information. Let's help you figure out how to do it. Yes, facilitators of learning, not judges. Like
judges of learning.
Judgment, right? So, yeah, I mean, I was thinking about I'm glad I'm not the only education mom who goes to like those teacher conferences or whatever. And I'm sure that now we're doing everything virtually, but when my son was a freshman in high school, we had to go in, and I'm sure they were like, oh my gosh, here's Mrs. Frankel.
Yeah, don't let her in.
No,
please
oh my gosh, she's just going to say stuff. But actually the following year, this past year, my son's school has brought me in virtually to give a bunch of workshops, which I really appreciate, because they're trying to really make it work. But I remember when my son was a freshman, and he was bombing as were all the kids, because the freshman teacher had this theory, the freshman English teacher had this theory that she was going to give the hardest thing first. And she wanted all of her students to sort of struggle and get their, C's through F's, and like really, and then it was like the craziest thing. And so that first conference, it was like, the first parent teacher conference, and she's talking to me about how my son is failing. And by the way, I just want to say, because who cares about grades, but he made honor roll this year. See, it's hard, even like my twisty brain. But I'm only saying that honestly, because I went to her, he was getting an F, and she started to tell me, the other teachers were telling me what they were doing in class, how my son was doing. All she wanted to talk about was the tests, the quizzes, and his grades. And I was like, do you have anything else to tell me? Because I actually don't care what his grade is. And he knows, and my son's sitting right there too. It's like they did it with the kids there. My son said, I was like, I don't really care what his grade is. Don't tell me about the tests, the quizzes. I don't really care. I want to hear about what you're doing and how you're going to, she had nothing to say, because I took away, that's all she was going to talk about was he did this on this test, and he got this score on this quiz, and he, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I just want to know, was he learning? Are you helping him to learn more? If he's struggling, how are you helping him?
That's the only marker for success. Yeah. I mean, they're not looking at those markers. They're just looking at grades. And if you take away grades, then suddenly you would have to be more involved in the relationship or the experience of learning. And that's a struggle. But here's an interesting question I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Brett says, I spoke with a group of homeschool parents of 8th graders this week as I was sharing how colleges use GPA tests for admissions. They admitted that they really don't do grades. For gradeless communities, how would they let the colleges know what they've learned?
So that's a great question, actually. And well, it's one of the reasons, to be honest, that RTA still does give that grade at the end of the semester and the end of the year, even though we don't grade anything in between, because we're still stuck in that system. But there's tons of homeschool kids who don't get a grade, and they get into really good schools. Really good colleges, if that's where those kids want to go, because the colleges actually, and I think more and more, and this is what we really need to work on, is the colleges more and more are looking at like a student portfolio. So what I would do if I were those parents, and I'm sure some of them are doing that, is you collect like sort of a digital portfolio of the work that kid has done. And I mean, it seems to me that to even ask homeschool parents to grade their kids seems silly, because they're either going to like falsely give them A's so that they can get into the other school. And we all know that. Do parents really cheat to get their kids into college? I'm not sure.
No, I definitely no. That's a no. No. Strong no.
Hard no. Cheating, hard no. Oh, by the way, and I do want to say, just as a side note, and this is actually a really important side note, when you take away the grading, the cheating is gone.
Oh, there is no cheating. Gosh.
There's no plagiarism, because if there is, they're just going to have to redo it anyway, and they know that, right? They'll like, okay, so thank you for turning in the work of that website. That was awesome. Now I'd like to see your work.
Yeah.
But I don't even get, I mean, in my last few years of teaching, there's no cheating. You can't cheat if you're not giving a test, you can't cheat on a test, right? If you're not, my whole feeling is, if a student can cheat on an essay or an assessment, then it's not a good essay or it's not a good assessment. It's not good if you can cheat on it. Right? It's not
yeah. I mean, I
asking them to use the information. So the colleges, I think, more and more are looking at student portfolio. And I think somebody else says that, again, a lot of people are dropping the ACT and SATs, Elaine mentions. And yes, and she says, is it blasphemous to mention that grades can be very arbitrary anyway? It is not only, well, it probably is blasphemous for people
is blasphemous.
Grades, but it is the absolute truth. How is my A the same as someone else's A? Are they?
No, because they're all given by humans. That's the problem.
Exactly. And even And even if you say that is like a point system, I remember when I had to give grades and I was like freaking out. I was like, how am I going to grade these kids on this stuff? Like there's so much more interesting things that I want, but I couldn't, I knew I had to do it. And so I would give them work, and sometimes I'd give them assignments just so I had something to put, like grade some assignment or something, just so I'd have something to put in my, grade book. And then I would let it compute, because the first year that I was teaching, we didn't have like the online, grade book or whatever. And it was just my grade book. And I was just like, I could just throw any grade in there. Like, really? It was so arbitrary. It was just my opinion about it. And even, then later, people would say like, okay, we'll give them a rubric so they know what to expect. And I was like, okay, well, that's like a little bit better. But then that was still really, it gave us a conversation piece, but I was still putting a number on it. And so I remember when I had this rubric at Arete early on before, and Jim said to me, like, why are you putting numbers on it? If you want to do a rubric, just put like, hey, these are things I expect. And then here's the thing, give them an example of this is such a Ron Berger thing. I have an episode with Ron Berger too. He's so amazing. He's my educational idol. But he talks about this too, that you show your students what it looks like, what a good product looks like. And give them examples. And one of the things I started doing is using examples of past students' work so that they could see students are capable of doing amazing work, right? And if I don't have something like that, I show them an example and I walk them through it. And because I want success, isn't that the goal of education? Isn't to trap them or trick them?
It's theoretically.
Theoretically, it's that they should all succeed. If all your students aren't getting, like A's and B's, whatever that means, then as a teacher, I'm a failure. Yeah. Like if I'm giving a C or D, I've talked about this before on my show, but I had a teacher when I was a senior in high school who said, with glee, he said, I fail at least one senior every year and then they can't graduate. It was like to put the fear of God in us or something. I don't know what it was about. But at the time, I just was like, loser. Like, it immediately put me off from that teacher because I was like, why would you want to do that? Whereas,
we're missing the point. Everything's been so diluted down to, I was having a conversation with someone the other day and it was, why do we educate? Like, what is the purpose? And I said, I really think that the why do we educate, the very foundation of all of that, no one's asking that question as much as we should. We now have all these layers of policies and procedures and assessments built on top of it that we're never getting all the way down to the bottom to say, why are we doing this? And do all of these things still align with our why, or our practices align with the why?
That is what you just said is everything. It's like, so I teach English, right? And one of the things that we say to our students when we're teaching about an essay is we teach them how to create a strong thesis statement, right? Mm-hmm. And then every single part of your essay needs to relate back to the thesis statement. It's the same thing. What's your educational thesis, right? Yeah. And then everything that we're doing shouldn't be detracting from that. Otherwise, if we were grading, right, people's ways of looking at education, man, it would be total F. No. Mm-hmm. But if I was giving feedback, if I was replacing that grade with feedback, I would go back and I would say, wait, this thing that you're doing, this grading, it doesn't match your why. It doesn't match your thesis. It doesn't you need to align. I mean, that's such a perfect, what you said.
Yeah. And I've done that in schools before. And then some of the work that I do is working with education teams, teaching teams. Right now I'm working with a SPED and a Gen Ed team and how they're kind of coming together to collaborate in those. And the first question the first thing we're always functioning through is, what's your goal? What's your values? What's your mission? What's your thesis, right? And then what are your practices? And do they align? We call it a culture filter. So if your thesis or your basis, what you want to do is build relationships, then you need to take every action and take it through this filter of is this building a relationship? Right. And at the very most basic version, it would say, if your outcome wants to be relationships and you're giving grades, can you take this F that you gave, put it through the filter of a relationship, and it do what you want it to do? Are your practices aligning with your purpose? Right. And I think we're so far from that in education as a whole giant picture right now, because there's so many things built on top of it that I really think, no, most of our practices are not aligning with why do we educate, because I don't know that we even collectively have the answer to that. Why do we educate?
That's the key. That's the key. We have to come up with that answer. And somehow it needs to be a universal answer, because if we're not, I think, one of the things you said is so important. People aren't even asking the question. People don't even know.
Right.
It's like, again, I'm going to make that analogy, but how do you write an essay if you don't know what you're writing about? It's just like a random collection of things that may or may not make sense. And that's exactly what's happening with education right now. It's just this random bunch of stuff that may or may not make sense, but we don't question it. And like you said, it's so layered that we can't even dig through all of those layers to say, wait a minute, why are we educating in the first place? What is the purpose? And like you said, if we don't understand what that purpose is, it's really hard for everything else to align to it.
And that's one of the big purposes of like future oriented classrooms and learning is that we want to raise critical thinkers. Right. We want these kiddos to be able to respectfully come against, quote unquote, a teacher or an educator to say, I respectfully disagree, right? To have these spaces where they can say those types of things. And to ask questions about, can you tell me why we do it this way or why we don't do it that way? Right. And I think that's really, really important because, I know for me, a lot of time growing up, it was don't ask questions, like just do it. Just do what I just said that you were going to do and don't ask questions. It was always disrespectful to ask too many questions about, well, why? I don't understand. And I think, yes, it can be. I mean, what we teach my 11-year-old is there's a respectful way to ask questions if you're looking for more information. Obviously, there are times where it's not, where you just need to, in an emergency situation, or if something's happening, right, then just go with it, okay? And ask questions later. But I don't always just take it for what it is. I mean, ask questions in a respectful way. And I think that's a huge piece of what students need to be doing because, and I think I'm seeing that, the more and more students they're not being given a space at the table in traditional education, but I'm watching it being taken. They're starting to take the space at the table and say, okay, no, I really do have questions about what you're saying. And why is that as valuable as you're saying that it is? And I think that's a huge thing. And I was thinking back to like our topic a little bit ago when Brett was asking about getting into college. My 11-year-old is already building her portfolio. Like when she builds an animation, then she just saves it in a file called Phelan or whatever, and then she can use that later. So even though we don't grade, which as we talked about is very arbitrary, she has something that I think is more valuable. She has proof of practice in this portfolio where she can come back and say, here are my actual projects that have been built. And no, it's not an F or an A, but here's what
and any college is going to look at that and they're going to be like, wow. I mean, that's your 11-year-old did that. And when you were 11, you did that. I know my son, when he was 11, was like that's when he started getting really serious about coding and creating 3D games. Now he does he creates apps now. He's 15. And I'm just like, okay, I'm not worried about, and I tell him that all the time. I'm just like, I don't really care what your grades are. Like, you're fine. You're learning. He learns on his own. That's the other thing is students, if they're interested in something, they're going to learn it, whether they have to learn it on their own or they learn it in school. And so our goal as educators anyway should be to try to develop that curiosity. And so to me, questions are literally the most important thing in education. If students aren't asking questions, it's really hard for any of us to learn anything. Everything starts with a question to learn something. It's if you're just being fed stuff, and you have to just take it in. That's a robot or something. I don't know what that is. And our education system was really about creating that. That's what it was based on, right?
It was a factory to create factory workers.
Exactly. And so we didn't really want people to question or think critically. And guess what? It worked. Because now I cannot believe how many people have no idea how to think critically, how to look at a piece of information and ask a question, how to even question it. right? I mean,
or to respectfully disagree.
And respectfully, like that is the key, is how do we have a respectful conversation with somebody with whom we do not agree, or just somebody who we want to find out information from. We want to clarify something. How do you ask in a respectful way? I love that you're teaching that. And I definitely talk to my students about that, and about also what all the different kinds of questions are. I actually developed a methodology for training for teachers to ask a wider variety of kind of question, and also how to train your students to ask a wider variety of kind of question, right? Because then it starts their thinking, and also it sparks their analytical skills. And so it's called Lenses of Questioning. And I teach work. You can check out, newlensed.com, and you can see the starting work up there, and online courses.
I like your little
commercial. But in all seriousness, because the bottom line is that it's all about questions. However you get your students to do that. However, and there's so many tools now that can facilitate those kinds of things where you want them to ask questions and you have to train them. I remember when early on, and I asked students before I had this methodology and everything. And I remember I gave students a piece of text and I said, give me 3 good questions on this piece of text. And I was, I wanted them to really look at it and ask me, delve into it and ask me these questions. And for 90% of them, the questions that they asked when they actually did come up with them, because not everybody could, were all what I call teacher questions, which meant they were all content. And I said to them, you asked that question. Did you really care? Did you need to know that? Or could you
care about the answer?
Text? And they're like, oh, no, I didn't know that's what you meant. Because as teachers, so often that's the kind of question we ask them, is something that they could just look up in the text. And now we know that kids can look up a lot of things. So we actually need to teach them, what's a real source.
Oh yeah, they don't need us anymore. And that's a whole other topic we could go down. And I talk about that a lot, is the ego of the educator is the students don't really even need us anymore. I mean, they don't need us in the way that they might have needed us.
They absolutely need us.
Before, they need someone to come alongside and help them kind of filter information and find out how to use it and all those types of things. But they don't need us in the sense that we're the only ones that have the answers.
Correct.
They can find answers everywhere, but now they need someone to come alongside them and help them process all this information,
synthesize it, and then transfer it to all of those things. And I think somebody else mentioned it too, that about being a facilitator, because that's really the shift now. I want to facilitate a learning experience. I want them to explore. I want them to learn how to learn. That's really it. Because if you can learn how to learn, then you do that on your own when you need to, which and do it with critical thinking and learn how to analyze and all of those things. And going back to the grades thing, when we grade something, it just sucks the curiosity out. It puts a stamp on it, and it's like, and done. Like that's it.
Because you're going for the product over the process when you're going for the grade, and you're missing that. And I think at the very core of all asking questions, and the schools that I directed were early education, and we were Reggio inspired, which Reggio at its very core is teaching them to explore it. What is the process? I mean, you don't even, in most cases, give them the product that they're shooting for. They're then exploring materials and creating what they want to create from it. And it was this epitome of how do we teach them to ask questions? How do they explore this on their own? And which is so natural in early education. I mean, you give them a bunch of rocks and they'll create 200 different things. And then they lose that over time and become less and less question askers, right? I mean, so I think it would be interesting in theory to take
we
squish it, and to take a Reggio lesson plan from an ECE classroom, throw it into a high school classroom, and see these students are saying, okay, what do you want me to do with the rocks? Instead of saying, okay, cool, I'll build a tower with the rocks or whatever, because we've that shift has happened between ECE, and high school in that way.
True. I always, I loved the Reggio stuff, and I always thought, why is there no high school doing this? But the truth is, there are schools now that are doing things like that, and a lot of like the project-based learning is so great. And I love project-based learning, and not, I also love doing projects with learning and doing projects and assessments, things like that. Two different things entirely. They have one word in common, and also the fact that there's a product involved. But I love the idea of a learning, of that learning experience of, I also love, like, when my head of school and I, when he was like, we're going to make a middle school, and let's just imagine what's like, if you could have your fantasy middle school, what would it be like? And we just dreamed it up, and he's like, okay. And so, and that's what they're doing now. They're doing all of these things that we dreamed up, things like deep dives into topics that the students are really, really interested in, things like quests, where it's all about discovering. We have the whole first semester is just like a sample, a poo-poo platter of stuff, so that students can figure out what they're really, really into and what they want to dive into more. So it's like a survey, and then they get to go in, and it's like, I wish I went to a middle school like that.
I know. I love interest-based learning. I mean, it's going to take you way cooler places than if the teacher only decides where you get to go. Honestly, and I'd rather teach interest-based.
And I would say even beyond that, I mean, so many teachers now, they don't have that freedom. It has been taken away from them. The ability to be creative and to be, and to go into depth has been replaced by breadth of subject. Potpourri was probably, or smorgasbord. We could just use many analogies for what I was talking about. But it's been replaced by this, you have to do it this way, and you have to do, I mean, some teachers, I've heard from teachers who actually, they hand them a scripted curriculum. You have to teach this, and you have to teach it this way. And it takes
Why even get a degree? I mean, what's the value of going to school to be a teacher? Like, you could pull anybody off the street and have them read a script.
Give them a script and tell them what to do. I mean, it's sucking the life. There's so many teachers right now out there that are just feeling like it sucked the life out of them. Like teaching isn't a joy anymore. And that is such a shame, because Lord knows we need good, passionate, creative educators out there who help students connect to the material, and also to know that every single class is different. Right? If I know these teachers who say, well, I've been doing this for 24 years and it works. I'm just like, well, have you been teaching the same thing the same way for 24 years? Because that means you've been teaching for 1 year the same way 24 times.
Right.
It's not a different problem. It's very different. Because if I'm teaching the same thing that I taught last year the same way this year, especially when I have completely different students, there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you're losing the value of emergent curriculum. I mean, your curriculum it could have a baseline, but it needs to be emergent to follow the students that are involved in the process of it. I mean, I think that's a whole big thing. And I think all of the things that we've covered, right? Teachers losing some of the ability to have creativity in their classroom, students, we talked about Reggio. So from ECE to high school, they're losing this ability to question with critical thinking and all those types of things. I mean, all of those mostly come back to this concept of grades, because we have to finish with this product. So ask the right questions, or you're not going to finish with this product, or don't ask questions because you won't finish with this project, or teachers aren't allowing for creativity because the school has to hit this thing because funding is tied to grades, which is tied to what you're doing in the classroom, which is all tied to this. And so you better get an A, which as we decided, is arbitrary. So, I mean, I think it seems simple enough, right? Just take grades out. It's fine. Just move them away. But it's a huge mindset shift that would have to happen. I mean, a funding shift and a teacher training shift. I mean, all of the changes that would have to go in it. But I love seeing it happen in what I call these little innovation pockets, like what's happening with you and what we're seeing at Galileo and other pieces are these just little people and little things changing a little bit at a time. And I really think the more value we see from these innovation pockets, the more we can use that to push back on this traditional model of everything is tied to a grade.
Right. And I think that it really goes about what you're saying. Teachers can't make their own sweeping changes necessarily. Like it's going to change, but it might not change that quickly. But we can do those little things. Like I was coaching this teacher at a very traditional school, And he said, oh, I have to give grades. He was kind of bemoaning it. I was like, well, why don't you ask your students to, and I gave him that idea of having them work with you on figuring out what they think they should get and so forth. He's like, you know what? I'll try it. He came back to me and he said, I can't believe how well that went. Like, it was so great. They were in shock that I even asked them, and we sat down, we had a really good conversation. Just what you were saying, replacing that with relationship. It added a relationship to that process that before that, students are just left out, sometimes.
And I think, and so I think if we were to take all of this and kind of put it into one, here's your nugget that you could leave with, right? It would be the possibility for the future of education not be to revolve around grades is real. The reality of it happening within the next 1 or 2 years is not necessarily, a big possibility. However, while we would love to overthrow education as a whole, just burn it down and start over, that we don't have to do that to start making changes.
Actually, I wouldn't burn it down. There are good things, and I would want to keep those. I do want to say that. I'm not so crazy that I want to burn down the whole thing. But there are so many things. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. No. I mean, keep the valuable things and burn down the general, the bad things. Keep the good things on the inside. But what I'm saying is, we can start to do small things like you were talking about, and replacing things even inside of systems that we don't technically. I don't agree with grades in general, but if I have to function inside of them, we can still make them work. I mean, so I don't want this whole, hey, gradeless is better than grades, to say, well, we can't go gradeless, so we can't do that. Can't do relationship, or we can't do this, because there are always innovation things that you can do inside of a system, even though it's not ideal, like you were saying with that teacher. And I think that's a big takeaway for this conversation is, your school may not go gradeless tomorrow, but you can still replace some of the practices with relationship building and things like you were saying.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. It's all,
so
we gotta keep moving forward. And I think, I mean, that's what I would leave with too, is that you're right. We're not going to be able to do this in a day, a week, a year, but we can make small steps towards it. And we shouldn't give up trying just because the task is daunting. Right? If the more people hear about this and understand it and try it, the more it will move forward. And I think this is the time, because of what happened in the pandemic. I think more people are questioning the value of grades. And I think now's the time, people, let's make those little changes any way you can. Stealth, right? Stealth throwers. You need people to be, like ninja, quiet, sneak in there,
because I think you're right. Now is the time. People are asking questions now where they haven't really before, and I think it's perfect. So if you were to what's your nugget that you're going to leave us with? Drop the mic on your last, I leave you with these words. Take
no pressure. Okay, no pressure. Be brilliant, but no pressure.
Be brilliant in 10 seconds or less. Ready, set, go.
I think, just to encapsulate everything that we said, that the changes aren't going to happen necessarily fast, but it must change. And I think that the other thing that you mentioned is really the most important thing. It all goes back to, why are we educating? And if we can align everything that we're doing, if we can define what that why is, and our purpose, our mission, our philosophy, whatever you want to call it, our vision, if you can align with that, every single other piece, that would change educate. It would be mind-blowing, the changes that it would make.
I agree. So we're going to just align everything with our mission. First, we got to answer the question. Then we'll align.
We have to define that mission. And I think every educator, everybody talks about find your why as a personal thing for an educator. I think that's lovely, but we need to ask the bigger why, which is what you were saying. Right. Why are, or how, what is the purpose? Actually, that's the best way to say it. What is the purpose of education?
Yeah.
We need overall to figure that.
We need to kind of agree on that collectively, and then we can build from there.
Yeah.
I think that's a great plan. Ready, set, go.
All right. I'm in. Sign me up.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me. And I think for a show called What Could Go Wrong, we actually did really well. Yay us.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I think it was fine. We had no drama as I've had in previous episodes. So that's a win. And all of you who joined in on the conversation, thank you. Y'all were awesome. You brought up some really amazing points. And I loved that. So we will see you guys. Oh, next week on What Could Go Wrong Live, Rachel is dropping the theme song that she wrote for me. So definitely hang out because it's amazing and I'm really excited about it.
I missed the theme song. Does that mean that you and I have to sing something together?
Yes, please sing.
Oh, I was totally kidding.
No, fine.
We'll wait. I'll wait and just
we'll wait for next week.
I don't want to upstage what Rachel may have.
Of course. We want Rachel to be able to do all those cool things. So we will see you guys next time.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.